Hey everybody, what is going on? Hexlex here with another Matser Duel video for you. So I wanted to take a video to talk about the Season 11 metagame, the post-ban list metagame. Now, the ban list update is a relatively minor one. You know, we're not seeing any major shifts like cards getting banned or going to 1, or cards going from banned or 1 to more copies. It was a fairly, minor update in that, we saw a bunch of cards that were at 2 go to 3, and then 3 go to 2. But I do think it's going to be enough of a difference that it's going to affect the metagame. It will have an impact still. Even these seemingly slight changes will still affect, how many decks or how often decks are played, their position in the meta. Like, even we saw this most recent pack, the water pack, wasn't anticipated to have like too much, at least by me and from what I saw by a few other people, wasn't anticipated to make too much of a splash. But we did actually see these decks crop up here in the meta and have a relevant showcasing. So it just goes to show that the impact of a deck might seemingly be minor, and at the end of it, the ban list, or not ban list, the tier list might not look too much different, but that doesn't mean that there aren't changes happening throughout. So I wanted to take 20 of the most powerful and most popular decks, both currently and what I anticipate will be the case after the ban list update, and talk about their place in the meta, where I think they lie, and what it'll kind of be like moving forward beyond the first couple of weeks of the Season 11 of the new meta there. So, alright, let's go ahead and get started in no particular order here. The first deck I've actually got here is Adamancipator. So Adamancipator, right, that's a deck that has been a little bit more popular lately than it has been in seasons past, when it wasn't even when Hulk got banned, because that was even very recently. It was even before that, honestly. Adamancipator just kind of like fell out of favor. I think one of the reasons is that, it's a deck that's got longer combo lines, but the end board isn't necessarily much better than like what other decks could do in a much shorter window of time, like Sword Soul Tenyi. And of course, with now Halki Fibrax being banned, that of course is another major blow to Adamancipator, as they did rely on Hulk for a good number of their combos. The deck is not unplayable, but it has definitely changed form especially since I've last covered it. The most popular variant by far now is the 60-card Grass variant, right? And that's how they set up a lot of their plays, just by dumping, like any grass deck, dumping most of their deck in the graveyard and then just kind of like reaping the benefits of that from there on out. So I haven't seen this deck too much myself in ladder, so I can't personally comment on exactly how powerful it is. I have considered going back to it. I'm really on like borderline of like crafting grasses and greeners right now for Dragon Link anyway, so at that point I would just explore a lot of decks I could make with the grass, and Adamancipator would definitely be one of them. I do think the deck is a pretty solid rogue deck. It's not something I would call tiered, but it's definitely still something that you can do fairly well with. I guess I'll explain here as well. Tiers 1, 2, and 3 I think are fairly self-explanatory, but rogue, sometimes I have people asking what I mean when I call a deck rogue. Rogue basically just means that this deck might not be as good as a tiered deck, again tier 1, 2, or 3, but it's still very, it can still be very competitive, and it's still capable of hitting Diamond 1, not even just like with the right pilot. I was gonna say with the right pilot, but honestly just in general. It's a lot of these rogue decks are not like too difficult to learn, and if you have like an even decent understanding with them, and you're willing to grind out through the ladder, it's definitely more than possible to get Diamond 1 with these decks. So I would definitely classify Adamancipator as a rogue deck. There are still some 40-card variants I noticed when I was looking at the top decks when I was doing my research for this video, but it does seem to be mostly 60-card grass variants. Next up, we have Adamancipator, which is a favorite of mine. I haven't really had a chance to come back to. I might try to get in a little bit of it here, at the end of the season. I might be able to sneak in a video, but it's kind of doubtful at this point. In any case, Adamancipator is still a very solid deck. I think it's been the case in pretty much the entire time it's been in Matser Duel, because I don't think it's gotten any new cards. I think it started with Dark Infant and all that stuff. So I think the deck has been a pretty solid rogue deck this entire time, and it continues to be a very solid rogue deck. They did also get the Heat Soul recently, the Decode Talker Heat Soul. So that was actually a pretty decent addition to the deck. That's one of the reasons, it's actually the main reason I still need to go back to the deck, is I still have yet to try it with the Heat Soul now added. it offers an additional kind of boss monster you can end on, as opposed to only having Arrival Cybers on turn 1 or the access code, update gym right to access code OTK on turn 2. Now the deck does have some other options to play into, which is nice. You do still kind of prefer playing into either Arrival Cybers or access code, but it's still, again, nice to have the additional boss monsters there. So, oh boy, Adventure Phantom Knights. This is one I'm actually pretty eager to talk about, because this is one of the more major shifts, I think, in the tier list here. Adventure Phantom Knights, Torrent Scales recently went from 2 to 3, and I think that's probably going to be, in my opinion, the most impactful change on this ban list. I don't think in neither the TCG or OCG we saw a ban list where Torrent Scales was at 3, maybe in the TCG, but I know in the OCG in particular, I think Torrent Scales might still be at 1, was at 1 at this point in the meta, or when Adventure Phantom Knights were fairly relevant, from what I remember from my research I did. So having 3 Torrent Scales, I think is huge. It's probably the deck's best starter, and definitely enables you, like, this is the sheer consistency of that is, I think, going to not only skyrocket the deck's popularity, as we're already seeing in the tournaments over on Matser Duel Meta, but is also going to skyrocket its power level as well. Currently on Matser Duel Meta's tier list, which I didn't want to reference because at the time I'm recording this, it's like actually the day before the new ban list drops, so it's only pulling data from tournaments that are using the new ban list, and I mean, that's always going to be the case anyway, but especially this early on, and they even have a disclaimer for this on their website, but like, at this early on, that data can be a bit misleading. It's fairly incomplete at this point, so that's why I wanted to do like a more, I guess, subjective tier list here. But they currently have Adventure Phantom Knights as tier 2. I'm really inclined to agree. I think it might settle at like the top of tier 3, though, is the thing. I think I'll put it in tier 2 for now. I think especially once the new list is live for Matser Duel and on the ladder, we're going to see a lot of people, myself included, playing Adventure Phantom Knights. And I think in that initial rush, it'll be tier 2. Maybe towards the bottom of tier 2, honestly, but I think it'll still be like tier 2 representation. As far as the power level of the deck goes, I really kind of think it hovers between tier 2 and 3, and I think as time goes on, representation for this deck will decline, and then I think at that point we'll see Adventure Phantom Knight more towards like the top or maybe even mid tier 3. Again, for the time being, I'm going to put it in tier 2, but like, I don't really like to use like tier 2.5. I think you're getting a little too like specific at that point, but this is actually a case where like, I really would, I think, qualify this deck as tier 2.5. Because I think it does have that specific of a spot in the meta, and will have a specific of a spot moving forward. Okay, next here we've got Sword Soul Tenny in particular. This deck has been, I mean, I feel like there's not really a lot I can say about this deck that I haven't already said. It's consistent, it's strong, and it's not going to really go anywhere until its power crept out of the format. Which will happen, with sprites and tier elementals, but that said, I think even once those decks come out, it's still going to be a solid tier 3, maybe even 2 deck. But of course, that's going to be a meta for another day. For the time being, like I said, this deck is still, there's not really much that's changed with it, and there's not really needed to be much that's changed with it because it's still just been like that solid of a deck. We all know Sword Soul Tenny is a very solid tier 1 deck, and I don't think that's going to be changing anytime soon, to be quite frank. Okay, so now we have Eldlich. Eldlich is kind of another one of those, like, I've talked about this before. It's kind of been a constant in the tier 2, I think. I think there have been times where it's kind of fluctuated down to tier 3, but I think overall, especially on like ranked ladder meta, Eldlich has like been a constant like tier 2 presence. I'll definitely put it above Adventure Phantom Knights. Adventure Phantom Knight is again what I would put at kind of like the bottom of tier 2 right now, because it might bleed into tier 3. But Eldlich, like, I think literally since season 1 has been a solid like tier 2 deck this whole time, and it makes sense, right? In a best of 1 format, stun/floodgate decks do tend to be better because they are able to take more games. Games 2 and 3 is really where control and stun decks, mostly stun decks, kind of tend to falter because then in again a best of 3 between games, you're citing in like your back row hate. your Feather Duster, more Lightning Storms, but here in Master Duel, you kind of have to, like, main deck Feather Duster if you can get away with it, and even then sometimes, like, you just still don't anyway because you want to play other stuff, and it's like, it's a little awkward. Like, there are some decks that kind of, like, more or less have to just concede the fact that they're probably going to lose to stun decks. And even among tier decks, like, to an extent, Sword Soul is kind of like that. Eldlich tends to be a pretty poor matchup for Sword Souls, right? They just have a hard time playing under most floodgates, like, particularly like Goes and Match, and there can only be one, and Skill Drain. So, Eldlich, yeah, I don't really know that there's a whole lot I need to say. The same kind of goes for this next deck here, Floowandereeze, is what I would also call a solid tier 2 deck. Pretty much has been, I think, most of the time it's been out. Like Eldlich, I think it might dip down into tier 3 every now and then, but I do honestly think Floowandereeze is the better, like, stun deck between the two, as far as Eldlich, between it and Eldlich goes. Just because I think the deck is a little bit less, can be a little bit less bricky, right? The thing about Eldlich's weakness has always kind of been that, like, even if you get floodgates, if you don't have access to the Golden Lord, like, it can be kind of hard to actually win the game because you're not really doing anything. You definitely need the body on top of the cards that are stopping your opponent from getting their bodies out, like their bigger monsters, or like their, you know, and then using the Golden Lord will keep their smaller monsters from pushing through. Floowandereeze is a bit different in that it's more of like a combo stun deck, but you can kind of more consistently get your, like, combo off. That does come with the trade back of, like, you're then more susceptible to stuff like Ash Blossom and Imperm, but with the Floowandereeze and the Advent Adventure having just come out, that is a huge consistency buff to the deck. It's kind of like giving the deck 3 more call buys in a way, which is kind of exactly what Floowandereeze quote-unquote needed. I don't know if they needed it necessarily, but it was like one of their weaknesses was the susceptibility to Ash Blossom, Effect Veil, Infinite Permanence, those kind of effects, and they got literally exactly the perfect card they needed to dodge those, so definitely more than a bit annoying, but I do think Floowandereeze, like I said, is a very solid tier 2 deck, and again, I think even more so than Eldlich in the current meta. So next year I have, as represented by Gizmek Orochi, the going second level / rank 8 deck. I know that sounds really like a generic kind of thing. I've also seen it called like the Danger Luna Kaiju, Luna being the Fairy Tale Luna, the 1851 that searches a monster, it searches another copy of itself basically, and then can bounce itself and an opponent's monster. This is a deck we see fairly regularly on the ladder. I do anyway. I run into it like a decent amount of the time, and I'm sure, you know, most of us who have laddered in Platinum, I think even Gold, you probably see it there, and Diamond have probably run into this deck at some point. Sometimes they do really scary things, like make a drag along with like 10,000 attack points and then just, like, you know, win. But sometimes they'll do like the Hope Harbinger, Junigate spells, and then and also generally just dropping a whole bunch of big monsters like the Dangers, the Gizmek Orochi, all that stuff. They often use the Astral Karibo to go into those Xyz monsters, so just kind of give you a feel of what deck I'm talking about there. I think this deck has always been fairly solid, and there's been a part of me that's been eager to kind of like try it out for myself, but at the same time, it does cost a fair amount of ultra rares, and it's not a deck I think I would play super duper often, so that said, I think it's a very solid deck, and we usually see it just in like the rogue status. You could make an argument that like it might be tier 3, but this is a deck that I would define as like upper rogue, because even within rogue, if I really wanted to, like if I really want to get specific with the rogue status, like you could kind of break rogue down into like upper rogue and lower rogue, within casual decks kind of being below that, where like upper rogue decks are going to be decks kind of like your you know, rank 8, level 8 going second deck, maybe your rival cybers I keep calling it a rival because of the picture, at Ignisters, Adamancipator I think might be kind of borderline. I think it's on like the, now I'm getting even more specific, the lower end of upper rogue, but like now, like I said earlier, we're getting into like tier 2.5 category here. Suffice it to say, I think this deck is very solid. It has been very solid, and I think it's even a little underrepresented. It's definitely a deck that shines on Master Duel Best of 1 format, for sure, because of the nature of it always getting to go second. and not having to worry about, like, you know, side decking and all that fun stuff. It's one of those decks that definitely greatly benefits from that. So next we have Yuumi Control, which is yet another stun/floodgate deck, but people are okay with this one because it's got DM nostalgia. I actually think this deck is fine. I think it's kind of cool even. I thought about maybe trying it out, but, you know, kind of like the level/Renegade deck, it's a deck that I don't think I would use very often at all, you know, beyond maybe like the first deck profile that I did on it. So the main point of this deck is to get the Kairyu Shin on the board. It's pretty much a walking Gozen match. I think it's what your opponent can't special summon non-water monsters, which is going to definitely be the end of, like, I mean, I'm looking at the rest of the decks on here, aside from like Marincess, of course. There's like pretty much no other deck that can really play through that here at all. The deck's been really, really popular, and it actually makes sense why, in Matser Duel in particular, because like I mentioned earlier when talking about these past couple of decks, right, we're playing in a best of one format, so any deck that's got like stun or floodgate elements to it is going to be better by nature of, you know, not having specific sideboard hate against them. And also the other thing too is, like, sometimes they can just steal games by virtue of, like, even if you're main decking the out, sometimes you just don't draw it, and they can just steal games that way pretty easily as well. So this was actually pretty tough for me. I don't know whether I'd put it. I'm actually, it's either the bottom. It's kind of in the same spot of Adventure Phantom Knights, honestly, where I want to put it at either like the bottom of tier 3 or the top of Rogue. I think just due to representation, how much it's been seeing play on ladder lately, I'll go ahead and put it here in tier 3. This is a deck that I do expect to probably decline into Rogue as time goes on, especially as new cards get released. The reason I pointed out its representation gaining its spot in tier 3 in particular is because, you know, this is a, you know, one of the new decks. It's one of the new toys that we recently got, so I think a lot of people are still you know, kind of flocking to it in that regard. And it's also, like I said, got that DM nostalgia as well. I do think those factors will wear off over time, and we'll probably see it in Rogue in, you know, the next tier list update, if I had to guess, but I'm willing to put it in tier 3 for the time being. Speaking of new decks, water-based decks, we got Marincess here as well. Marincess being somewhat similar to Adamancipator in that, you know, they are a Cybers deck, and they end on a, they like to anyway, they prefer to end on a big towers, towers being monsters that are unaffected by other card effects named after Apocryphal towers. Just a huge monster that's unaffected. It can be very difficult to get over. Marincess is a pretty interesting deck, and it's actually one that I was also kind of curious about. Like, I really did think about going in on this this Oceans pack, but it was a number of factors. It was the fact that, again, like, I didn't know how much I was going to be playing these decks. I didn't really have the time to this season. As I've mentioned a couple of times, I had quite a few IRL stuff happening this month, so I haven't been able to invest in as much time in Matser Duel in general this season as I have in the past, so there was that factor as well. But Marincess does seem like a very neat and fun deck. Like the you know, Yuumi Control deck, I would expect that over time you'll probably start seeing less and less of this deck, especially as new support comes, or like new just cards in general come out. But I still think they're a fairly solid Rogue deck. I'm willing to put them, I'll put them below Adamancipator, but I think they're, if I can do that, but I think they're probably in about the same place as Adamancipator as far as their power level and honestly popularity goes. Fairly comparable in terms of, like, again, not only how popular the deck is, but what the deck does as well. So yeah, I'm willing to put Marincess there as a very solid Rogue deck. Next I have here, of course, Branded Despia. I mean, like, do I even have to really talk too much about it? Like, still definitely the top tier 1 deck. Although, I will say, especially in the last few weeks, we've been seeing the meta pan out in a way, like, that I kind of thought it would, as far as, like, Branded Despia being the top deck, that and Sword Soul Tenny, and that we're seeing a meta that's fairly diverse, because I've said it before, I'll say it again. Branded Despia and Sword Soul Tenny might be very, like, prominent tier 1 decks, but they're not, like, oppressive tier 1 decks. They're not, like, shutting out all of these other, like, all of these decks are decks that I've seen on ladder, and all of these decks are decks that are honestly viable to hit Diamond 1 with. I think this is a fairly healthy format, and I have been seeing fewer and fewer people as time goes on complain about the format and complain about Branded Despia. Yeah, I think we're in a really sweet spot here. I think as maybe some future releases come out, we'll be in a maybe bit slightly less sweet spot, but I guess it also depends on your perception of what a healthy meta looks like. We'll just have to see that as we cross that bridge, but suffice it to say, Branded Despia, absolutely still a house, a force to be reckoned with, and is what I would call the best deck of the format right now. But it's not by as much as you might think. And definitely don't let the power level, power level figures you see on Matser Duel Meta, like, deceive you either. Like, it's not as bad as it may seem, is my take on it, so. Next here we have Numeron. Again, kind of like the last deck. How much do I really need to say about Numeron? We've all run into it. I think it's been pretty consistent rogue presence, honestly, the whole entirety of Matser Duel. We all know how it works. We've all been OTK'd by Numeron before, so I don't think we need to go too much into it. I would still qualify it as like one of the quote-unquote top decks in that, like, it is good at what it does, but I might even put it under the rank 8, but it's definitely up there among upper rogue decks, for better or for worse. Excuse me. Alright, next here we have Sky Strikers. So, this is a deck that also got a pretty nice benefit from the recent ban list. They got the Widow Anchor to 3, up from 2 copies, which is a more minor update than the Torn Scales from 3 to 2. Excuse me one sec. Oh, pardon me. Yeah, so that is going to be a more slightly minor benefit as opposed to the Torn Scales from 2 to 3. The Widow Anchor isn't necessarily like a key starter or combo piece to Sky Strikers, but it's a very, very solid form of disruption and a very annoying one. I have had my fair share of games where playing at Sky Strikers, you have that moment of they set the Widow Anchor because they searched it either earlier in the turn or maybe reset it from the graveyard with the multi-roll, and you just kind of have that moment of how am I going to play around that? Because not only being able to negate a monster, but then also being able to steal it to prevent it from being used as a material for a summon or something is particularly devastating. So I think that card going from 2 to 3 is honestly going to make a decent impact on the deck. It's honestly been in this weird spot for a long time. You could even argue the entirety of Matser Duel where it kind of hovers between tier 3 and Rogue. I think it's going to be tier 3 just due to representation. Due to Widow Anchor going to 3, I will be trying Sky Strikers as well fairly early on in Season 11 too, so look forward to that deck profile. Alongside, of course, Adventure Phantom Knights is going to be one of the first decks I tackle there as well, but I do think this could also be enough of just a power boost in general to see Sky Strikers maybe remain more in tier 3, but I still see a world where they end up dipping back down into Rogue a little bit as well. But for the time being, I'm willing to put Sky Strikers here as a very solid tier 3 contender. I would argue that maybe power level wise they have always been a solid tier 3 contender, but it's maybe just representation that causes them to dip back down into Rogue. It could also be format dependent, contingent on what decks are, because Sky Striker will be better against certain decks than others naturally, every deck. So depending on what decks are doing well in tier 1 or 2, kind of I think also depends on whether Sky Striker lands in 3 or Rogue. But I think again, just due to the nature of having 3 Widow Anchor, again due to popularity, and then also I think is due to power level, we'll see Sky Striker pretty firmly in tier 3. Alright, next up we have here Tri-Brigade. You could qualify this as Tri-Zoo, but I more am referring to Tri-Branded or Branded Tri-Brigade when I'm referring to Tri-Brigade here. Maybe pure variants as well. In any case, Tri-Brigade is a deck that I love, obviously, and have a soft spot for. And in the last time I did a more subjective tier list, on a tier maker like this, I was really up on Tri-Brigade, and I was very confident they were going to be a tier 3 deck. And I would argue power level wise, they're probably still in that tier 3 category, but they're definitely not seeing the representation that I would like to, just based on what I'm seeing on not just Matser Duel Meta, but also I poke around the Discord, the subreddit, to see what decks people are talking about. And Tri-Brigade, I am sad to say, does not really get the representation I would like to see it have. It's definitely a rogue deck. I think it's maybe around here in terms of well, again, in terms of power level, I think it kind of bounces between 3 and Rogue. Maybe it's even upper Rogue up here. In terms of like representation, it's probably more like down here, or maybe even below Adamancipator, honestly. Like it might even just be on the bottom here, but I want to put it up here just to make myself feel better. I don't know, and like I said, I think Branded Tri-Brigade is a very solid deck. I guess you could call it my pet rogue deck at this point, but I like everyone who has a pet rogue deck, I'm gonna be that person who's like, I think it's a tiered deck, but you know, that's again just a very subjective take. Next up, we have Tri-Brigade Lyrilusc, which I've been meaning to do more research and possibly come back to. This is a deck that I think a lot of people I've seen in the comments have mentioned, and I've also seen it too. Been seeing this deck more frequently on the ranked ladder there, which is kind of cool. It's been like since I think early, you know, Matser Duel Meta, like, you know, seasons 1, 2, 3, that we've really seen this deck kind of prominently featured just on the ranked ladder. I don't think it's ever really stopped being a solid deck in general, being able to spit out some pretty nasty boards fairly easily. Its major weakness has always been its susceptibility to disruption. Max C in particular is like, Max C is such like a doom sentence for this deck, like, because it's really hard for it to make anything beyond like small monsters with 100 attack and defense without special summoning, like, you know, 3-4 times at least at the bare minimum. So yeah, it's very difficult to play through a Max C there. I think this is a deck I would have liked to have. I really would have liked to have crafted the Cross-Site Designators in particular sooner than I did. I think this deck with Cross-Site Designator at 3 would have been really interesting as far as combating the disruption like Max C and like Nibiru. This deck is very susceptible to Nibiru as well. But yeah, it's kind of like too late to do that at this point. I do think this is a very solid rogue deck. I'm willing to put it down here, you know. Like I said before, these are the rogue decks. You could definitely do well with it. It's not quite a tiered deck, but definitely not hard to hit like upper diamond with it. Next we have Dragon Link. An eternal enigma for me personally, as I constantly am trying to like figure this deck out and try new builds. Like I touched on earlier in this video, I really do want to get to the Grass is Greener build at some point, the 60 card variant. I just gotta like make the plunge and craft it, honestly. As far as where the deck lies on the tier list, it's definitely still a very solid tier 2 deck. As far as like popularity goes, it has been dipping down into maybe like you know, lower tier 2 or maybe even arguably tier 3 categories. In terms of representation, in terms of power level, like I said, I think it's still a solid tier 2 deck. I'm willing to put it right here. And I want to put it up here above like Floowandereeze and Eldlich, but if I'm being honest with myself, I do think that Floowandereeze and Eldlich are not only seeing more play, but are also like arguably slightly more powerful. Well, I don't even know that they're more powerful. That's the thing about Dragon Link, right? It's always weird to like place on the tier list, particularly in terms of actually not even just representation, but power level, but also like definitely representation, because it's one of those decks that like, you know, if more people played it, like it would definitely have like a higher spot. Its power level definitely justifies that. But it's also a very complicated deck, and it's kind of intimidating to get into. I've been practicing with it for a while now, and I'm still fairly intimidated just playing the deck. And there are also so many different ways to build it that I think that's another like factor that causes people to not jump right into it. So I think it's still a solid tier 2 deck though, either way. Alright, Salamangreats. Now when this deck, the structure deck came out more towards the beginning of the season, it was definitely more up here in like the tier 3 category in terms of its popularity, but I think the then release of the, actually you could look at, they came out at the same time, right? That structure deck and then the new pack, but I think over time, you know, the water decks kind of tend to see a little bit more popularity, I guess. And also I think the Kiryu Shin Yumi control deck is a better deck in terms of its power level as well. Salamangreat I definitely think has dropped from tier 3 to rogue. I'm willing to put it like in upper rogue for sure. I think it's probably around the same place as like adding Nister and Marincess, so I'm willing to put it among those here. It's still a very solid deck. It's a deck I'd still like to come back. Like a lot of these rogue decks, it's what I want to come back to. It's like just trying to like find the time to get to like every deck, you know. But I do like the deck a lot, and I do think it's a very solid deck as well. Speaking of decks I love and are very solid, Heroes. Heroes. I think Heroes have been a pretty eternal rogue presence. I'm willing to put them like even up here. I do think there have even been times where, like, not just in, we've seen it on Matser Duel Meta's like tournament tier list, but like even in within like ranked ladder. I think especially more towards the beginning of Matser Duel, like Hero kind of definitely dipped up in like tier 3 category. It's kind of like Adamancipator and Tri-Brigade Lyrilusc in that it's like got a lot of really strong plays. It's fairly consistent. It's just really susceptible to disruption. So that in a best of one format kind of like keeps it in the rogue category. Just because, you know, you don't have like other games to play through disruption. You don't have the side deck to side against that disruption as well. But if only they didn't have so many ultra rares. But heroes will always have a place in my heart, and I definitely think they will always have a spot in the rogue portion of the tier list here. So Madolches I wanted to cover because when looking at the Matser Duel Meta tournament tier list for the current like at this current time, we saw them, I think, even in tier 2 for a minute, and they're in tier 3 now, and we've seen that be the case before. Madolches are definitely a very strong deck, but I think they're definitely one of those decks that might get a bit misrepresented in terms of the tournament tier list as opposed to ranked ladder tier list. You know, it's easier for a pet deck like this to do better in a tournament when it's got like a best of 3 format. I don't know that they've always been doing well in best of 3 format tournaments, but I would assume for at least some of them that would be the case. And then also, you know, with the tournament tier list in particular, if one person or like a few people consistently do well with a rogue deck, they will then boost that deck's power level. I don't want to say artificially, but they'll kind of inflate it to a point where you're seeing the deck more represented on a tournament tier list than you would ever on a ranked ladder tier list. Madolches are a very solid like rogue deck, but I don't think they're one that's gonna like be bumping up to tier 3 on the ranked ladder at least anytime soon. Alright, so here we have Live Twins. Live Twin is a very much a pet deck of mine. I love this deck a lot. I think it's kind of like a Sky Striker, honestly, in terms of not only how it plays as a control deck, but that I feel like it's kind of constantly bouncing between tier 3 and rogue tier. I'm willing to put it up here as a fairly solid rogue deck. In the past, I've been a little bit optimistic in terms of it's just breaking it off its power level, and I tend to put it in tier 3, but I do think power level wise it could, again, it just bleeds between tier 3 and rogue as far as that goes. I just think it doesn't get played as much, especially in like a meta like this where there's so many different things to play. I think a lot of people are kind of gravitating more towards newer and or more powerful decks, so that's maybe why we're not seeing quite as many Live Twins as we did like when, you know, Trouble Sunny came out, but I still think the deck is very solid. And then finally we have Virtual World here. So Virtual World did get Lao to 3 up from 2. They are another deck that you know, we saw get a boost in power level. I don't really have much to say about Virtual World though, because I haven't played against them, I think, at all, honestly, since the ban list where VFD, the True King of All Calamities, that card got banned. I've been meaning to do more research on them, and I've actually got, I think, in the next viewer special, I saw somebody leaving a comment about how they were playing with Virtual World, and I was eager to check that out. So you might see it featured there. I'd like to feature it there, just so I can see kind of what Virtual World is up to, so to speak. But I think just due to representation and just how little I know about it, I've got to put it down here in Rogue. But I don't think that necessarily... Well, okay, if we factor in the popularity of Lao going up from 2 to 3, I don't think that'll affect it too much. I'm willing to say it might be, like, up here somewhere, in terms of, again, just, like, popularity. But power level, again, this deck's a bit of an enigma to me. I just don't know much about it post VFD there to maybe... or to make a definitive claim on it there. So... okay, that is the last deck. So again, these are 20 of the top most powerful and or most popular decks that I you know, kind of think should be represented on a tier list here. Last time I did a tier list, I only did tiers 1, 2, and 3, so I also wanted to make sure we included Rogue as well. Rogue does tend to be usually the most expansive of the tiers there, but I think it's still good to cover a lot of what you can expect to see on ladder there. So yeah, definitely, for one, thank you for watching all the way to the very end of the video like this. That does mean a lot to me, not only personally, but as a means of supporting the channel. Two, definitely let me know in the comments what you think of the tier list here, where you think these decks fall, where you think they're going to be maybe a few weeks out after the meta has settled, and just your personal thoughts on the meta as well. I would love to hear from you as always as ever. And yeah, if you feel like subscribing, I definitely appreciate that too. It is the best way to stay notified of when these videos drop, which does happen every day. So you do get a daily Matser Duel video for subscribing there. But that's going to be it for today. So without further ado, this is Xlex. I'm signing out, and I hope you have a fantastic day.